Hey there, lovely soul. Welcome back to Noah's Stories. Have you ever taken a wrong turn and ended up exactly where you needed to be? Tonight's story is about heartbreak, fate, and the unexpected kindness that can change your life. It begins with one lost woman and one wrong hotel door. That wasn't wrong at all. The rain didn't fall gently. That night, it slammed against the streets like a final warning. Mira Thompson pressed a trembling hand to the taxi window as her driver pulled up in front of the Grand Ridge Hotel, a towering sanctuary in the heart of Chicago. Her reflection was blurred in the glass-wet hair, red-rimmed eyes, and the hollow stare of someone who had just watched their carefully built life collapse in a moment. 30 minutes ago, Mira had walked into her apartment with Chinese takeout and a heart full of hope. Her boyfriend of 5 years, Sean, had texted her earlier, "We need to talk." Tonight, she assumed it meant a proposal. Instead, it was a confession. A woman, a weekend in Miami, a mistake he didn't regret. He didn't even ask her to stay. Now, Mira clutched nothing but her handbag and a few belongings stuffed into a weekender bag. No coat, no plan, just heartbreak and the sound of rain pounding like a drumbeat in her ears. "Need help with your luggage?" the doorman asked politely as she stepped into the lobby. She shook her head. I just need a minute." Inside, the hotel glowed with warmth, fireplace flickering, soft piano music drifting through the air, the scent of fresh jasmine. Myra, soaked and shaking, was painfully out of place. She sat on one of the velvet lounge chairs and tried to breathe. "You can't cry in public," she told herself. "You're not that girl." But she was that girl tonight. She ordered a drink at the hotel bar, then another, then something stronger. The bartender, a kind-eyed woman named Janelle, gave her a soft smile. "Rough night?" Mira nodded. "You know, sometimes life throws you somewhere wrong to make something right." Mira gave a tight, tearful smile. "That's a nice thought." At 11:42 p.m., a hotel staff member passed by, apologizing as he bent to pick up something he'd dropped. Mira blinked at the keycard that had landed near her foot. Suite 921, penthouse level. She picked it up, turned it in her hands. Staffer was already gone. Was it fate? Was it the wine? Without thinking, without caring, Mira stood up and walked to the elevator. She needed a place to rest, just for a while. The top floor was silent, elegant, bathed in soft golden light. Room 921 stood at the end of the hallway. Myra hesitated for a single heartbeat, then swiped the card. Click. The door swung open. She stepped into a room straight from a movie. Floor 2 ceiling windows overlooking the glittering skyline. A fireplace, gently burning. Plush carpets, artwork. A grand bed with snowy white linens that looked softer than clouds. But Myra didn't care. She walked in, dropped her bag, and collapsed onto the bed fully clothed. Within minutes, she was asleep. In the private study attached to the suite, Landon Reeves stared at a spreadsheet he couldn't understand and a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched. 38. He had more money than he could ever spend, more awards than he could count, and a condo in New York that was practically a museum. But he had no one to come home to, and he hadn't slept in days. He rubbed his temples and walked into the bedroom only to stop short. There, in his bed, lay a woman curled under the blankets, shoes off, hair messy, breathing softly. She was not part of any meeting, arrangement, or mistake. His first instinct was to call security, but something about the way she looked broken, exhausted, human stopped him cold. She looked like someone who had just been through hell. He sighed and quietly stepped back, closing the door. He slept on the sofa. When Mira woke, sunlight painted the room in soft gold. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then she turned and saw the man sitting in the chair across the room, reading a newspaper. She froze. "Good morning," he said, folding the paper. His voice was calm, low, kind. "Who are you?" she stammered, clutching the blanket to her chest. "I'm Landon, and this is my room." Myra's heart nearly stopped. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't." Her voice cracked. "It's okay," he said gently. "You looked like you needed sleep more than anything. I didn't mean to. There was a key and the elevator, and I believe you," he said simply. Then, after a pause, "Are you okay?" Mira blinked. That was not the question she expected. "No," she whispered, "not even close." They say that sometimes the most important people in your life don't walk in, they simply appear. like a quiet breath after the storm. That's how Mira felt as she sat across from Landon Reeve at the tiny breakfast table in the corner of the suite. She still wasn't sure if she was dreaming. The man was calm, almost unnaturally so. His white button-down shirt had the crispness of someone used to control. His voice, soft and deliberate, sounded like he measured his words before giving them away. Mira stared down at the plate of fresh fruit and warm croissants he had ordered. For her, the scent of coffee danced in the air. She hadn't touched anything yet. "You don't have to eat," Landon said gently, "but you do have to breathe." She blinked and gave a small laugh, shaky but real. "That obvious? I've been there," he said. Myra looked up, studying his face. Not conventionally handsome, but striking, intelligent, worn. There were creases around his eyes, like he'd smiled once, a long time ago. "You slept on the sofa," she whispered, glancing toward the still rumpled cushions. "I didn't want to wake you," he replied. "You looked like you needed the kind of rest that can't be bought." She winced slightly, embarrassed. "I really didn't mean to break into your room. I know, and you're not going to call security." He shook his head once. "No, you were hurting. I understand that." Mira finally reached for a grape. "I'm not usually like this." Landon offered a soft, almost unreadable smile. "Neither am I." For a while, they didn't speak. The silence wasn't awkward, it was a shared quiet, like a safe space neither wanted to shatter. Then Landon leaned back in his chair, eyes drifting toward the window, where the rain had paused, leaving the city glistening beneath soft light. His voice dropped lower. "I lost someone, once," he said. "A long time ago." Mira tilted her head. "Someone close." "The closest," he said. "My brother, Michael." She didn't expect that. His voice wasn't choked with pain, but it carried something heavier, something deeper. The way someone speaks after they've told the story too many times but still feel every word. It was a car accident. He was supposed to take a flight. Changed his mind last minute. Took a cab instead. Wrong place, wrong time. Landon exhaled slowly. "We were building this company together, Mason Ridge. He was the reason I started it at all." Mira felt a lump in her throat. She whispered, "I'm so sorry." He nodded, as if accepting a truth he'd long since made peace with. "After that, I worked non-stop, because if I stopped, I'd have to feel it." And then he looked at her, not just at her, but into her, noticing the storm behind her eyes. "What happened to you, Mira?" Her throat tightened. She wasn't used to people asking, not really asking. She wasn't used to answering, either. But something about this room, about the way this stranger had shown her quiet compassion without expecting anything in return, made her feel safe. "I walked in on the man I loved," she said softly, "with someone else. No warning, no explanation. He just looked at me like I was the one intruding." Landon didn't react with pity or outrage, just understanding. "And I walked out," she added, "left my coat, my keys, everything. I just couldn't stay in that place for one more second." "That's why your hair was soaked," he murmured, "and why you looked like someone who forgot where she was going." She nodded. "I didn't even know where I was headed. I ended up here, without meaning to." "Or maybe," Landon said, "you ended up exactly where you needed to be." That sentence hung in the air between them like something sacred. There was a pause, a long, soft moment where neither of them knew what to say next. Then Myra glanced at the elegant clock on the wall. "I should probably go. I don't want to take more of your time." "You're not," he said gently, "but I understand." She gathered her bag slowly, carefully, almost like she didn't want to break the calm. As she stood, Landon rose to pee. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a sleek white business card, and placed it on the table beside her half-finished plate. "My number, if you need a friend." Mira hesitated, then took it. "Thank you," she said, meaning more than the words could carry. She turned to leave, but just before reaching the door, she paused and looked back. "You said you'd been there," she said. "Where I was. How did you get through it?" Landon's eyes met hers. "You don't get through it, not all the way, but one day, you start to breathe again. Then you laugh without guilt. Then you wake up, and the pain doesn't feel like a storm anymore, just weather, something you learn to live with." Mira nodded slowly. Then she smiled, small, uncertain, but real. And with that, she stepped out of the room that had held her sorrow, her confusion, and maybe her first piece of hope in a long time. As the door closed behind her, Landon stared at the quiet it left behind. She was gone, but something in the room had changed, and he knew, deep down, this wasn't the end of their story, it was only the beginning. Some people leave a room, but their presence lingers like the last note of a beautiful song, still echoing after the music ends. Landon stood there for a long while after Mira left, the scent of jasmine tea and rainwater still floating in the air. Something inside him, something long dormant, stirred, and he didn't know what to do with it. He had always been good at silence. It was safe, predictable. But after just one unexpected night, that silence felt louder than ever. He sat back down at the breakfast table and stared at the untouched food. His phone buzzed with back-to-back meeting alerts, a scheduled investor call, a lunch with the city's mayor, a dinner event at the ballroom downstairs. But none of it mattered. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about acquisitions or hotel expansions or press releases. He was thinking about a girl who walked into his room by mistake and somehow walked into something else entirely. Landon reached for his phone, not to cancel meetings, not to reply to emails, but to text a name he hadn't forgotten. Mira. Just that. One name typed out. But he didn't hit send. He placed the phone face down. If she wanted to talk again, she would. And if not, then maybe it was enough to know that for a moment, two strangers had found shelter in each other's presence. Elsewhere in the city, Mira stood outside a small cafe tucked between an art gallery and a bookstore. She hadn't meant to walk this far. Her feet had moved on their own, guided by instinct more than direction. She hadn't returned to the apartment. She couldn't, not yet. So she stepped inside, ordered a cup of tea, and found a seat by the window. Outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds were breaking apart like paper torn at the seams. She pulled out the business card he'd given her. Simple, clean, just a name and a number. Landon Reeve, Mason Ridge Hotels. She turned it over, half expecting a handwritten note or a message. It was blank. Part of her wanted to throw the card away, to leave this strange detour behind and start over, clean and strong. But another part, quieter, wiser, told her not to, because sometimes the detours are the story. Mira took a breath. Her phone buzzed. It was her best friend, Tasha. Where are you? You okay? I'm at your place. Sean's not here. Call me. Mira closed her eyes for a moment, then typed back slowly. I'm safe. I'll explain soon. Just need time. She slid her phone away and stared out the window, sipping her tea. Then, like a memory returning all at once, she thought of Landon's voice from earlier. You don't get through it all the way, but one day, you start to breathe again. She smiled a little. Then she did something she hadn't done in days. She opened a fresh page in her notebook and started writing. Not about Sean, not about betrayal, but about the moment she opened the wrong door and found a stranger who hadn't looked at her like a disaster, but like someone worth listening to. Hours passed. She wandered through the gallery next door, got lost in a painting of a woman standing alone in a storm. Her umbrella turned inside out. It made her laugh, because somehow, it looked exactly like how her heart felt. When she finally returned to her temporary Airbnb that evening, she found a small bouquet of white gardenias at her door. No note, no explanation, just a simple gift. She looked around the hallway. No one in sight. The flowers weren't from Sean. He wouldn't know a gardenia from a grocery store bouquet. She picked them up slowly, cradling them like something fragile. Later that night, she found herself dialing the number on the business card. Her thumb hovered over the green call button. Then she stopped. No, not yet. But she saved the number in her phone, under a name she wasn't sure how to label. 3 days passed. Landon was walking through the hotel's rooftop garden, usually reserved for guests in the highest suites. It was quiet, breezy. He often came here when the world felt too loud. His assistant had scheduled back-to-back interviews, one with a business magazine, another with a tech reporter. He'd cancelled both. Instead, he walked among the lavender and rose vines and watched the city move far below. He needed that kind of distance. It reminded him that no matter how busy life became, everyone down there was carrying their own story, their own quiet fight. Then, just as he was about to turn back inside, his phone buzzed. A message, just a few words. Thank you for not judging me. I've been thinking about that morning ever since. His heart stopped for a beat. He typed back, I've been thinking about it too. Would you like to talk again? There was no reply for a while, and then, yes, just talk. They met the next evening, not at the hotel, but at a quiet rooftop cafe she picked. Neutral ground. No accidents this time. No misunderstandings. Myra was already seated when Landon arrived, a soft blue scarf around her shoulders, her hair freshly washed and pinned loosely. She looked lighter, not fixed, but no longer broken. "I hope this wasn't strange," she said as he sat down. "It's not strange," he said, "it's honest." She nodded. "I've been trying to remember who I was before everything fell apart." "I know that feeling. I've spent years rebuilding myself," Landon admitted. "But the truth is, the person I was before he doesn't exist anymore. And maybe that's okay." Mira looked at him, her eyes soft. "You don't talk like most people I know." "That's because I stopped pretending a long time ago." The air between them shifted again. A quiet understanding grew, not rushed or dramatic, just real. They talked for hours, about childhood, regrets, books, songs they secretly loved but never admitted to. She told him about the time she tried to climb a mountain on a broken ankle, out of pure stubbornness. He told her about the time he ran a hotel opening on 4 hours of sleep and nearly burned $1 million deal because he forgot to sign the right page. They laughed, not because they were healed, but because, somehow, even for a moment they weren't alone. And when the night ended, neither of them said goodbye, only "see you soon." Neither of them knew what would come next, but for the first time in a long time, they were beginning to hope. You can't always tell when your life begins to change. Sometimes, the most important moments don't arrive with fanfare. They whisper, they unfold in the soft space between heartbeats. For Myra, change began with silence, not the kind that hurt, the kind that healed. After that evening with Landon on the rooftop cafe, she walked home without music in her ears, without distractions buzzing in her mind. The city around her was alive, but she didn't need to match its pace anymore. For the first time in years, she was learning to be still with herself. There was no kiss goodnight, no promises made, just eye contact that lingered a little too long, and the knowledge that someone out there truly saw her. In the days that followed, Mira didn't text Landon often. He didn't flood her phone with messages either, but when they did speak, it was real. No small talk, no masks. They met again twice more that week. Once in a quiet museum, where they stood side by side, staring at paintings and letting silence do most of the work. And then again at a tiny street market, where Landon surprised her by buying a carved wooden trinket shaped like a phoenix. He handed it to her without explanation. When she gave him a puzzled look, he only said, "Because some people don't break, they burn and rise." She didn't know how to respond to that. Not right away, but she held the phoenix close in her coat pocket all the way home. The next morning, Myra sat at her desk with a cup of warm tea and an old notebook in front of her. A real notebook, not an app, not a tablet. Just ink and pages. She wrote her name at the top of a fresh page and then, slowly, began to write something she hadn't dared to in years. What if the worst thing that ever happened to me was actually the beginning? She stared at the words, then underlined them twice, and from there, she wrote for hours. Not just about Sean, the betrayal, or the hotel mix-up, but about who she was before she forgot, who she wanted to become again. The more she wrote, the more she realized her story wasn't ending, it was unfolding. But still, part of her hesitated, because she wasn't sure where this connection with Landon was going. It wasn't romantic, at least, not yet. It wasn't transactional. It didn't fit in a neat box. It just was, and maybe that was what scared her most. One rainy evening, Myra received an unexpected message, not from Landon, from Sean. "We should talk. I made a mistake." Her heart clenched, not out of love, but out of all the things still unresolved, the apology she never got, the explanations never given. She stared at her phone for a long time. Then, without warning, she dialed Landon, because she needed advice, but because she didn't want to pretend she was fine. He answered on the second ring. "Hi," she said softly. His voice came warm and even. "Bad day?" "No, just complicated." A pause. "Do you want to meet?" he asked. She did. They met at the same cafe, same table, same gentle quiet. Mira handed him her phone, showing the message from Sean. Landon didn't flinch, didn't judge. He just looked at her and asked, "Do you want to go?" "I don't know," she admitted. Landon leaned forward. "Then ask yourself this: if he hadn't betrayed you, would you ever have ended up here?" She froze because the answer was clear. "No," she whispered. He nodded. "Sometimes we spend so long mourning the story we thought we were writing, that we forget the one we're in now might be better. Mira took a deep breath. It's just hard to trust myself. Landon's gaze was steady. Then, start small. Don't trust outcomes. Trust intentions. Trust the fact that today, you didn't run away from how you feel. That counts. Myra looked down at her hands, fingers wrapped around her tea. I didn't think anyone would understand. Most people won't, he said, but the right ones will. Later that evening, she wrote a message to Sean. She didn't rage. She didn't accuse. She simply said, I'm not the same woman who left that night. I hope you find your healing. I'm finding mine. Then she deleted his contact and let go of the version of herself that had once waited for closure. She no longer needed it. The next morning, Landon called her with a question she didn't expect. Would you come with me? To a place I haven't been in years. He asked, where my brother's old cabin. It's outside the city. I go once a year, but this time, I don't want to go alone. Myra hesitated, not because she didn't trust him, but because the invitation was heavy with meaning. He was opening a door he rarely let anyone near. I'll come, she said softly, and when the weekend came, they drove together. Miles beyond the skyline, the city lights faded behind them, replaced by trees and winding roads, and the scent of pine through open windows. The cabin wasn't large or modern, but it felt like memory. They spent the day walking trails and watching light filter through branches. Landon showed her the place where his brother used to sit and draw birds. He told her how he used to laugh when Landon got lost in the woods. That night, they lit a fire and sat on the porch wrapped in quiet and warmth. Neither spoke for a long time, until Myra whispered, why did you bring me here? Landon's answer came slowly. Because you remind me that life still has meaning, even after you lose the parts you thought you needed most. She turned to look at him. I feel that way too, she said. And in that moment, something shifted, not in a dramatic way, but like the slow blooming of something real, something neither of them needed to name, because sometimes, the most powerful stories are the ones that take their time. And for the first time in years, they weren't running from the past, they were walking toward something new. Together. Asterisk. Some people enter your life like a storm, loud, messy, unforgettable, but others come like the dawn, quiet, steady, changing everything without trying to. Mira had spent years bracing for storms, but lately, something else was rising in her, something slower, something more permanent. The weekend at the cabin didn't bring some wild confession or grand romance. It brought honesty, space, breath, a chance to simply exist without fear of being misunderstood. Landon didn't ask her to be anything other than what she already was. They sat by the fire that second night, wrapped in thick blankets and surrounded by the scent of cedarwood and earth. Mira looked up at the stars. Out here, far from the city's noise, they seemed endless. Do you ever think, she asked, voice barely louder than a whisper, that you were meant to lose everything just to find who you really are? Landon didn't respond right away. He was watching her, not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but like he was seeing a version of her the world had overlooked. Sometimes, he finally said, you don't find yourself until the silence gets loud enough. Myra nodded slowly, letting the words sink in. I used to think love meant always being needed, always fixing, always giving more than you got back, she admitted. Landon tilted his head. And now, she said, smiling softly, I think real love feels like permission, to rest, to be, to breathe without apology. There was a stillness between them after that, not awkward, just full, like the moment didn't need more than what it already was. The next morning, Landon handed her an old photo album worn around the edges, full of memories from a time before everything changed. This was my brother, Caleb, he said, turning to a photo of a boy with unruly dark hair and a lopsided grin. He was the wild one. I was the quiet one. Mira smiled. I can see that. He died 5 years ago, Landon said, voice steady but distant. Motorcycle accident. He was chasing a sunset, according to the police. Mira's breath caught. I'm so sorry. It wrecked me, Landon continued, eyes on the photo. Not just because I lost him, but because we hadn't talked in weeks. We'd fought. About business. About him wanting to sell his half of our childhood home. He closed the album. I built everything after that. This hotel empire. The structure. The order. The control. I thought if I could just make everything perfect, I wouldn't have to feel the chaos again. Mira reached out and placed her hand gently over his. but grief doesn't care about structure, she said. Landon looked at her, then really looked. No, it doesn't. She held his gaze. And yet, you're still here. That night, as they packed to return to the city, something subtle had shifted. They didn't talk about what might be between them. They didn't need to. But when they reached her apartment later, and he walked her to the door, he paused before saying goodbye. I don't want this to end with a weekend, he said quietly. Mira's heart beat a little faster, not from fear, but from the courage it took to be seen like that. Then let's not let it, she replied. They stood there for a moment longer, the night pressing gently around them. Then, without hesitation, Mira leaned forward, not to kiss, but to rest her forehead lightly against his. The world stilled. She whispered. You're the first person in a long time who didn't try to fix me. Landon closed his eyes. You're the first person in a long time who didn't expect me to be perfect. In the following weeks, they didn't rush. They didn't label what they had. Instead, they met in bookstores, wrote letters they never sent, walked through quiet neighborhoods, sharing memories that hadn't seen daylight in years. Landon began taking mornings off. He left his calendar half empty. For the first time, his assistant was confused. Dan Landon didn't care. Mira, too, had changed. She began writing essays, more stories of survival and unexpected beauty. She submitted one to a local literary journal, thinking nothing of it. A month later, she got an email. We'd love to publish your piece. The door I wasn't meant to open moved us deeply. She stared at the screen, tears welling in her eyes. Not because someone accepted her writing, but because someone accepted her truth. One evening, Landon brought her to the top floor of Mason Ridge, the same hotel where their story began. This used to be just a building to me, he said as they stepped into the suite. A monument to control. Mira stepped in quietly, remembering her first night here. Lost, broken, confused. Now it's a memory, Landon said softly, but one I don't want to forget. The suite was different now. Warmer. There were plants by the window, books on the table, a blanket folded over the couch. You've changed it, she said. No, Landon replied, turning to face her. You changed me. Mira felt something stir in her chest. Not a whirlwind, not a rush, a gentle blooming. I didn't mean to. I know, he said, but sometimes, the most powerful people in our lives are the ones who don't even know what they're healing. They stood in that room for a long time. And then finally, he reached for her hand, not to pull her closer, but to simply hold it, a promise without words. They didn't need to say it yet, but it was there, the beginning of something real, something earned. And as the city shimmered beyond the windows, Mira realized she was no longer afraid of the future, because she had already lived through her storm. And now, she was learning how to live through the sunrise. Some endings don't feel like endings at all. They feel like the breath you take before something new begins. Mira once believed closure came like a full stop, something definite, something sharp. But now, standing on the rooftop of Mason Ridge, her hand gently wrapped in Landon's, she understood. Closure is not a door slammed shut. It's a door you choose to walk past, even when it stays open behind you. That night, sleep didn't come easily, not out of pain, but because her heart felt full in a way it hadn't in years. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying moments from the past few months, the night it all collapsed, the mistake that led her to that suite, and the man who was never part of her plans, but somehow became part of her healing. The next morning, Mira woke early. She made coffee and sat by the window, notebook in hand, not because she needed to write, but because the words were finally ready to be spoken out loud. She was no longer telling stories for validation. She was telling them for freedom. In that moment, she began writing a new piece, not a journal entry, not a letter, but the first chapter of a book she never thought she'd be brave enough to start. It was called Rooms I Wasn't Meant to Enter. She smiled at the title, because it was never just about a hotel room. It was about walking into the wrong place and finding the right part of yourself. Waiting. 3 months later, Mira stood in front of a small audience at a local bookstore. Her first public reading. Her palms were sweating. Her heart raced. But when she looked up and saw Landon in the back row, hands in his coat pockets, that quiet, steady smile, something inside her settled. She began to read. Her voice didn't shake, because these words weren't just words, they were her. And afterward, strangers approached her, tears in their eyes, saying things like, "That was me once. I thought I was the only one. He gave me hope I didn't know I needed. Mira didn't know how to respond at first, but then she realized she didn't need to say much. She only needed to keep telling the truth, and so she did. That night, Landon walked her home. They didn't talk about the future. They didn't need to define anything, but as they reached her door, Myra turned to him with a soft smile. I don't want to keep waiting for life to tell me what I already know. Landon looked at her, curious. I want to be brave enough to love, she said, voice steady, even if it doesn't look perfect, even if it doesn't come with guarantees. He stepped closer, not rushing, not assuming. And do you, he asked gently, love? Mira nodded slowly, eyes shining. Yes, I do. Landon let out a breath, one he hadn't realized he was holding. So do I. They didn't fall into each other like in the movies. They leaned in slowly, carefully, like people who had earned each other, not through grand gestures, but through quiet choices. Day after day, the kiss they shared was not about passion or fireworks. It was about arrival, a homecoming. Weeks turned into seasons. Their lives didn't become perfect. Landon still struggled with grief. Myra still had days where the shadows crept in, but now they faced those days together. They built something honest, something unshakable. Myra's book went on to touch thousands of women who thought they were too broken, too late, too small to begin again. Men who had buried their pain in success, thinking healing was weakness. People who had forgotten what it felt like to be fully seen, because that's what Myra and Landon had given each other, permission to be whole without needing to be flawless. And one day, while packing up boxes to move into their first shared home, Myra found the tiny wooden phoenix Landon had once given her. She held it up, smiling. You kept this all these years. He nodded. It reminded me of you. Myra laughed softly. You gave it to me, remember? I know, he said, stepping behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. But I think it was always yours. There was no fairy tale ending, no castle, no crown, but there was love, there was peace, there was resilience, and choice, and mornings that began not with fear but with purpose. And somewhere in the world, a woman named Mira, who once walked into the wrong hotel room carrying only her pain, now woke each day beside a man who never tried to save her, only reminded her that she could save herself, and that love, real love, meets you where you are, then walks beside you to where you're meant to be, not fast, not perfect, but faithfully. And that was enough. Maybe it always had been.